What is up, fam? Agent O here, and it is now 4 a.m. in the morning. I just saw the Legendary Pictures Godzilla film. I saw like a 1 o'clock show, so this is why my review of it is so late. But I was like, let me just while the movie's still fresh in my mind, let me just do a quick review and talk about all the good and some of the bad in this film. So I want to go to sleep, so I'm just gonna jump right into this review. Starting with all the good stuff. Now, one of the great things that I liked about this film was that, from a technical aspect, things were done pretty right. Like, there was great cinematography in this movie, lots of great camera work. Whenever there was a time where they needed to show scale and just size, and not just with the kaiju, but with just maybe the area that the characters are in, they definitely did that. Lots of great aerial shots. Lots of sweeping camera movement during the times where there was action. It just lots of it. It felt like a actual Godzilla film if it was shot in Japan with like a ginormous insane budget. Because Japan does some of the movies that some of the old school Godzilla films have some of that camera movement. Um, Also, I really dug conceptually like how everything was very well thought out with the script. Uh, you know, there was the kaiju's behavior is not even Godzilla's behavior and purpose in this film is different from you know all the other Godzilla films that have all the other Toho Godzilla films that have come before it, and I think the reimagining of the character and of also the enemy kaiju's purpose and whatnot is because that since this since this movie doesn't take place, it's not. I guess it doesn't. It's not made in America, basically. So the Japanese nuclear war, Hiroshima, Godzilla's a metaphor for the nuclear arms race and all that. It doesn't apply in this case because it's not being done. This movie isn't being made by Japanese. It's being made with the property, so it calls for a different take on the character and the setting of the film. But I actually like it. It's very well thought out, and it's thought out, but it's simple. Because the explanations are really easy to follow, and if you know anything about wildlife, then this is gonna make sense to you. I'm trying not to. I'm trying to make this as spoiler free as possible because I went into this movie not really knowing a whole lot about the plot other than what I saw in a few of the trailers, and the trailers did a pretty good job of withholding a lot of info from you. And so I really dug that because all this stuff was coming to me as a surprise, and it was when it was fun seeing this whole thing just unfold on screen. So yeah, aside from the concepts, the storyline, like I said before, was very well thought out. There were no like blatant plot holes that I could see like right off the bat. I'm sure anybody would sit there long enough they'd figure out something, but I thought it was pretty open and shut, from beginning to end. Any questions that you might have had with why the military might be doing what they're doing and is it going to work, blah blah blah. It's kind of like you have those questions and then somebody in the movie asks that exact question and then someone else will give them the answer as to like this is why. It's like the screenwriter was actually thinking of how all this is going to work, and would there be like what is the simplest and most obvious solution, and what is the reason, and what are the simplest and most obvious reasons for why they're doing what they're doing or why things are happening the way they are. And it makes for a solid plot for this film. um Also, the human characters, they also followed some of the same, plot beats or behavior that you've seen in, say, like other Godzilla films or even some Gamera films. The military, they think they have a handle on things, but they really don't. And and in the grand scheme of of what's going on in the film, the military really doesn't have any real effect. And you always see that in Godzilla films. You always see them come up with new weapons and stuff to take on Godzilla, or to at least try and stop him from destroying the city. And they might do a little damage, or they might stun him, or it might have some effect, but it never actually fully stops Godzilla. He's an unstoppable force of nature. And it's the same thing in this film. They're shooting at him and stuff for a period of time, and it does absolutely nothing. So, it was nice that they still held, that they still followed that aspect of these movies, because that's part of what makes Godzilla Godzilla. Unlike, say, the Transformers movies, where the Autobots were almost not necessary in the film because the humans were finding out ways to beat the Decepticons. So it was kind of like, what were the Autobots even there for if the humans had weaponry that was on par with, the space age tech that the Cybertronian Decepticons had? But anyway, I'm not going to get into those failures of a film that the Transformers series were. We're talking about Godzilla here, and Godzilla, Gareth Evans and everybody worked on this really brought it with this film. Um, Also, one of the other plot beats that I noticed that they always do with human characters in these films is that, the scientists, they have a handle on, they have a handle on as far as, knowing what's going on with the kaiju, and their behavior and why they're doing what they're doing, and they'll advise the military on what they should do. But of course the military doesn't listen, because we've got the firepower, we got the manpower, we're gonna take them down, we're gonna get her done. That's how the military always acts. So it was cool that you see the play that you usually see in Godzilla films in this Godzilla film. It feels more like like a real Japanese Godzilla film than the TriStar movie did. I won't even get into that movie either, because my God, you all know how terrible it is, so no need to even mention that shit. Um, I also dug the fact that, in an offhanded manner, that the people actually, like the military and, the characters involved, were actually in a way helping Godzilla, and then vice versa. There was times where Godzilla actually helped the people, even though that wasn't Godzilla's purpose. Like the human element in this kaiju movie isn't really a factor. You know how usually in Godzilla films, Godzilla shows up, tears up the city, destroys the nuclear power plant because of the whole, nuclear metaphor thing that's prevalent in all Godzilla films. But in this film, that's not the case. The humans are just kind of there, and Godzilla's just doing his thing. Godzilla and the other kaiju, the Mutos as they're called. I think the Muto stood for massive, unidentified. God, I can't even remember, something object, terrestrial object, I think, something like that. But anyway, it's very National Geographic type of. Their behavior is more like actual animals, and when you hear the explanation of why these animals even exist, from a sci-fi standpoint, it makes sense, and it doesn't really seem out of place. But that's pretty much, as far as pros go for this film, that's pretty much the things that stood out to me the most about what made this film good. Now, there is some shitty elements of this film, and there's just not that many, and depending on what the kind of Godzilla fan you are, it may be a problem for you, it may not. For me, it was a problem, and the main problem I had with this film is that there was just not enough, kaiju on kaiju action. There was, usually in a Godzilla film, you get some small fights interspersed throughout the film, and then you get the ginormous big throwdown at the end, just like any martial art movie you've ever seen. The same modus operandi is done with those movies, just as it is with kaiju films. And in this film, right when the action starts to get intense, or the kaiju start to really meet and start to throw down, it cuts back to the people. And I mean, at least in this film, unlike the TriStar Godzilla film, at least in this one, everyone's purpose makes sense. It's their purpose is always kaiju oriented, and whether or not they're dealing directly or indirectly with the kaiju, it's always it's always focused on them and what they're doing and where they're at and whether they're fighting and who's it caught in the middle of the fighting, that sort of thing. So, and that's one of the things that you always see in the Toho movies. So in this case, they got that right. It's just there was just so much focus on these people, and not to say that what they were doing wasn't interesting, because it was. It's just that they needed to balance it better. Basically, there just needed to be more kaiju action, especially at the end. Like the end, you got a pretty decent fight, but it could have been a lot longer, and there could have been more going on. Um, I At first I thought like maybe the reason why they handled things the way they did was because of budget problems, and that's possible. But then I think about Pacific Rim and just all the fighting and action with when they were in their Jaegers, when they were fighting all the kaiju. Like there was a lot of action in that movie just them fighting the monsters. And they had a pretty decent budget. I don't know how much this movie cost to make. I haven't checked out Movie Mojo yet to see like how much they even made opening day or whatnot. But I think that if they had a decently sized budget, at least 170 million, we could have definitely gotten more fighting between Godzilla and the two Mutos that were in the movie. Um, but yeah, that was my biggest gripe. So hopefully, if they do a sequel to this film, they'll have more of a budget, and they'll take more time to you know choreograph some really cool action sequences. But like I said, what you did see was actually really, really good. Godzilla did exactly what Godzilla does best, and that's fight kaiju. And of course, thank God he had his signature, blue flame breath, the atomic breath. It came in full effect in this movie, and when you see it, it's quite a nice spectacle. Um, and it wasn't abused, and it wasn't completely overpowered, which was cool. It was just different to see that, you know, it didn't come off as like a finishing move at that either. So that they definitely had a plan, and they executed that plan, very well. It's just I just wish there was more action between Godzilla and the monsters he was fighting. So that's basically my biggest complaint about the film. I really didn't have any other problems with it. I know other people might complain about the human characters and that they were boring. I know there was a Godzilla review on io9.com, and that was what was in their headline. I haven't actually read their review. Just their headline said that the boring characters were a downside to what turned out to be a very good film. So I didn't have that big of a problem with the human characters. I just felt they focused too much on them. I know that there needs to be focus on the human characters at the beginning of the movie, because just like any other Godzilla movie, you have that also. They're there to kind of set up the plot and to kind of keep it moving in between fights. But in this case, it was like the human characters, because you've got some big name actors in there. It was like they needed to make sure that these guys got a whole bunch of screen time, maybe because of actor ego or whatever, I don't know, or because they feel like the human characters are the selling point of the movie, even though the movie's called Godzilla and Godzilla is the selling point of the movie. If anything, the TriStar movies kind of prove that point, because you can't have the main attraction of a movie be a supporting character in the movie. And I'm not saying that happened in this case with this new film, but it still feels like they aired more towards the main actors in the film and less on the main attraction, which is Godzilla. But anyway, that's basically how I feel about the film as a whole. I mean, for some people, there might be enough action, in this film between Godzilla and the monsters that he fights. For me, I could have easily taken a lot more, maybe like 5 more minutes worth of action. But anyway, the movie does feel like the old school Toho Godzilla films, or the 2000s. It feels like how they should have done Godzilla in the first place way back in the day. So anyway, that's gonna do it for this review. I'm Agent O, and I'm out. Peace.